Tonight, you will probably lie awake for some part of the dark. You'll stare at the ceiling. You'll feel the weight of the quiet pressing against you. Maybe you'll check your phone, not because you actually want to, but because the glow feels like company. And at some point, you'll start to wonder what's wrong with you. Why your brain won't slow down. Why sleep, this thing that every animal on Earth does automatically, involuntarily, without thinking, feels like something you have to earn. Something you can fail at. You are not broken, but you are lost. And the reason you are lost is something that no sleep app, no white noise machine, and no warm glass of milk will ever fully fix. Because the problem isn't your habits. The problem is your world. For 99% of human history, for hundreds of thousands of years before the first city, before the first candle, before the first written word, no one had a word for insomnia. And that wasn't because sleep was easy and peaceful and people drifted off happily every night without a care. It was because the night itself was a completely different kind of place. And your body, right now, tonight, in that bed, is still wired for that world. The one that no longer exists. Let's go back 77,000 years. To a rock shelter carved into a cliff face above the Tongadi River in what is now South Africa. Archaeologists call it Sibudu Cave. It's one of the most studied early human campsites on Earth, and for good reason. The preservation there is extraordinary. Layers of ash, stone tools, animal bones, the physical residue of tens of thousands of nights lived by people who were, biologically, identical to you. When Lynn Wardley from the University of the Witwatersrand began excavating the lowest and oldest layers of the site, she found something that stopped her team in their tracks. She found beds. Not metaphorical beds. Not loose piles of debris. Deliberate, constructed sleeping mats, made from compacted plant material, dated to 77,000 years ago. 50,000 years older than any previous evidence of human bedding ever found. These are the oldest beds in the archaeological record. But the age wasn't even the most important part. The most important part was what they were made of. The dominant leaves in those mats came from a plant called Cryptocarya woody, known today as Cape Laurel or bastard camphor. Its leaves contain natural chemical compounds that kill insects. They are still used in traditional medicine across southern Africa today. Ancient humans, 77,000 years ago, weren't just collecting whatever plants were nearby. They were deliberately selecting a specific aromatic species to keep mosquitoes and other insects away from their sleeping space. They were engineering their beds for sleep quality. And the evidence shows they burned the old mats periodically and built fresh ones, a kind of ancient hygiene routine, repeated across thousands of years of nights in that same cave. Think about what that tells you. These people were not passively collapsing into unconsciousness after dark. Sleep was something they worked for, something they prepared for, something worth protecting with deliberate effort and botanical knowledge, because in a world full of predators, disease, and unpredictable food, bad sleep could kill you. And so they treated sleep the way we treat almost nothing anymore, as something sacred enough to plan around. Now fast forward to 2013. A researcher named Jerome Siegel, the director of the Center for Sleep Research at UCLA and professor of psychiatry at UCLA's Semel Institute of Neuroscience and Human Behavior, had an idea that came to him while studying sleep in wild African elephants. He noticed something striking. Elephants in the wild slept very differently from elephants in captivity. The artificial environment changed everything. And it made him wonder, what were we actually comparing when we compared modern human sleep to something we called natural? Because all the research on ancestral sleep had been theoretical. No one had actually gone out and measured it. Not properly. Not at scale. So Siegel did something almost no one had done before. He sent researchers into the field with small wrist-worn actigraphy devices, sensors that measure waking and sleeping with precision, and asked them to spend weeks alongside 3 of the most traditional, pre-industrial human communities still living on Earth today. The Hadza of Tanzania, who hunt on foot with bows in the same savanna grasslands where our ancestors evolved. The San of Namibia, one of the oldest continuous human cultures on the planet, living in the Kalahari Desert. And the Tsaman of Bolivia, hunter horticulturalists living along the Andean foothills. 3 groups separated by continents, by genetics, by thousands of years of independent history, but all still living, more or less, the way human beings lived before electricity, before industry, before the clock. By the end of the study, Siegel's team had collected sleep records from 94 adults across 1,165 total days. It was the first study of its kind ever conducted. And the data that came back would append almost everything researchers thought they knew. The first surprise was the duration. These people, living without any artificial light, sleeping in the open air under a sky full of stars, they were not getting 8 hours. They averaged between 5, 7 and 7, 1 hours per night, with a mean of about 6 hours and 25 minutes. Less than most people in industrialized countries believe they need. The idea that modern life has stolen sleep from us, that our ancestors were getting long, luxurious nights that we've somehow lost, turned out to be, in Siegel's words, a myth. They stayed up late. On average, 3 hours and 20 minutes after sunset. They were not going to bed when the sun went down. They socialized, they sat by fire, they talked. Just like us. But here is where the data stopped being reassuring and started being devastating. When the researchers asked about insomnia, about the experience of lying awake, unable to sleep, night after night, the response was almost incomprehensible. Only 5 to 2. 5% of the people studied reported any problem initiating or maintaining sleep, even when the concept was carefully explained. And among the San and the Tsaman specifically, the finding was even more striking. Neither group has a word for insomnia. Not an obscure word. Not slang. No word at all. The experience is so rare in their lives, so outside the ordinary texture of what a night feels like, that it never required a name. Compare that to the United States, where somewhere between 10 and 30% of adults report chronic insomnia. Where the sleep aid industry generates billions of dollars a year. Where you, maybe you specifically, right now, watching this, have lain awake more times than you can count, wondering what is wrong with your brain. Nothing is wrong with your brain. Your brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do. The problem is that the environment your brain evolved for no longer exists, and the mismatch between those two things is expressing itself every night in your bed. Here is what Siegel's team found when they looked more carefully at the physiology. The hunter-gatherers weren't falling asleep because it was dark. Darkness was just the backdrop. What actually triggered sleep in these groups, consistently, across all three communities, across all three continents, was a drop in ambient temperature. Every night, as the air cooled, their bodies began the process of shutting down. And every morning, as the temperature hit its lowest point just before dawn, they woke up. Not because an alarm told them to. Not because the sun was up yet. Because the cold had reached its floor, and their nervous systems registered it, and they opened their eyes. That falling temperature was the switch. The ancient signal. The thing your body is still waiting for, every single night, in your climate-controlled bedroom, under your temperature-regulating comforter, in a room that holds the same 68 degrees from midnight until morning without variation. Your thermostat broke the signal. And without that signal, your nervous system stays partially alert, partially waiting, processing a cue that never arrives. And then there's what researcher David Sampson discovered about the Hadza that adds something even stranger to the picture. Sampson, from the University of Toronto, Mississauga, published a study in the Proceedings of the Royal Society B in 2017, tracking 33 Hadza adults for 20 nights with continuous monitoring. What he found was almost impossible to believe at first glance. Over the entire 20-night observation period, all subjects were simultaneously asleep for a grand total of 18 minutes. At least one person was awake and alert during 8% of all nighttime hours. Not because anyone had decided to take a watch. Not because there was a schedule. But because the young adults, who naturally lean toward staying up later, toward evening activity, and the elders, who naturally wake earlier, who sleep lighter, covered the dark together, automatically, without coordination, simply by being human beings at different stages of life in the same group. Your body was designed for that. To be part of a living system that breathed and watched and slept in overlapping rhythms. Not for a sealed bedroom, a closed door, a single body alone in artificial dark, with no one awake on the other side of the wall. Now here is the part of this story that most people don't know. Because the destruction of our ancestral night did not begin with smartphones. It didn't even begin with television. It began, arguably, with a single moment on October 21st, 1879, at a laboratory in Menlo Park, New Jersey, when Thomas Edison demonstrated a working incandescent light bulb that could burn for more than 13 hours. Within a generation, the structure of the night collapsed. As Stanford sleep researcher Jamie Zeitzer has put it, electric lighting allows us to stay up later, but we still get up early, compressing sleep from both ends. And populations in the Amazon today who live without electricity sleep more than 30 minutes longer each night than their neighbors who have access to it. The light bulb didn't just extend the day. It amputated part of the night. But there is a piece of history here that is even more quietly devastating. Because before Edison, in medieval Europe, in the centuries before industrialization, people didn't sleep in one continuous block the way we now believe is normal and correct. Historian Roger Kirch at Virginia Tech spent decades combing through thousands of documents, diaries, court records, household manuals, prayer books, works of literature spanning from roughly the 15th through the 18th centuries. And what he found, buried in those ordinary texts, was a completely different relationship with the night. Pre-industrial Europeans slept in two phases. A first sleep that began after dark, then a quiet waking period, lasting 1 hour, sometimes 2, that was called the watch. And then a second sleep before dawn. During the watch, people prayed, spoke quietly with their spouses, tended the fire, checked on animals, lay still and thought. It was described in those old texts the way we might describe making coffee in the morning, as an ordinary, expected, unremarkable part of the night. So unremarkable that when a 9-year-old girl named Jane Rowland appeared in a 1699 court record and mentioned waking from her first sleep, she offered no explanation whatsoever. Everyone knew what that meant. Everyone lived it. The watch was not insomnia. It was a named feature of the dark. A quiet pocket of consciousness built into the structure of the night, between two sleeps, in a world where the dark lasted long enough to hold it. Then Edison's light bulb arrived. And within a few decades, as the night shortened and the evening extended and people began sleeping in one compressed block, doctors started to classify the experience of waking in the middle of the night as a disorder, a pathology, something to be corrected with medication and behavioral therapy. The language of first sleep and second sleep faded from the medical texts, then from everyday speech, then from memory entirely. A practice that had shaped centuries of human nights, that may have shaped the minds of Shakespeare, of Chaucer, of every medieval monk who woke at midnight to pray, vanished so completely that today, when people wake at 3 a.m. and feel a strange, calm alertness, they reach for their phones and scroll, and call it anxiety, and wonder what's wrong with them. When what they're actually feeling is the watch. We gave up the falling dark for the perpetual glow. We gave up the communal night for the sealed room. We gave up a body that knew, without instruction, when to sleep and when to wake and when to simply lie still in the cold and think, in exchange for a world that runs on a schedule the body was never designed to keep. The sand never needed a word for what you feel tonight. And somewhere in the distance between their language and yours, a whole understanding of the dark went quiet.